new to Tritons or just getting to know us, we are a training and consulting company. We're focused on customer success, software adoption, and organizational change management. And since 2006, we've been helping SaaS buyers and SaaS sellers around the world achieve their desired business outcomes through adoption of technology, which of course is the topic of our webinar today. A few housekeeping items before I turn it over to your presenter. One is that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available for replay on the resources page of our website at www.tritons.com. And we encourage you to type in questions throughout the webinar. You don't need to wait until the end. Typically, we structure our webinars so that we have about 30 minutes of presentation and then about 15 minutes of questions and answers at the end. So without further delay, I would like to turn this over to your presenter, who is Jason Whitehead, CEO of Tritons.
Thanks, Jen, and hi and welcome everyone. This is Jason. It's great to be here with you guys. Hope you'll enjoy this presentation. Before I jump in, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background or a little bit about my background so you understand some of the perspective that we bring to this and some of the things we'll be covering today. So I've been working in the software adoption space for about 20 years now. Early in my career, studied information systems management and spent a lot of time hands-on actually implementing enterprise systems, primarily CRM, working with a lot of sales, service, and marketing teams in very large organizations. And the common theme was that we could get a system live pretty easily, but then we really had trouble to get people to adopt it and get business value out of it down the road. And that really became the pivotal point for my career, which has since focused on how do you solve that problem of making sure that once the system is live, that you're getting people to use it effectively and designed and creating the business value. So what I wanted to do today is to share a few perspectives that I have and some of the things that we've learned over the years through working with clients, studying and researching and experimenting with different techniques to really just give you some high-level views that can help shift some of your thinking so that you can start to ask some different questions so that you can help work with your customers a little bit in a new way. So with that as a backdrop, let's jump right in here. So really some of the goals for this presentation are trying to understand from a customer success perspective, as a vendor working with your customers, what is it that you need to be doing and why is this such a challenge for you? And really help create sort of a basic understanding of why both the buyers of software and vendors are really struggling to get adoption and some of the areas that they're having the wrong approach. I want to shed some light on some things that really can say, oh yeah, we do that, or oh, we don't do that. And at Tritons, we work with both buyers and sellers of software, and consistently what we hear from them is, that makes so much sense, why aren't we doing that? Yep, we should change our approach, our technique is getting in the way. So I want to try and give you some ideas around what might be holding you back and some new directions that you can explore going forward. And then moving forward, I also want to try and share some other ideas of better ways to engage customers that will help promote effective system use and adoption and business value creation that frankly, just some people may not have had the time to think about before that can really help shift some thinking both in your organization and within your customers. So those are the goals. As Jen said, please don't wait to type in any questions you might have into the Q&A box here as we go. So let's start with even the basics. I mean, why do we even need customer success? When you look back, 15, 20 years ago, when enterprise systems and on-premise was the way to go, software vendors would charge large upfront fees and get a system sold. And it was really up to the buyer of the software to make sure that they were successful with it and getting value from it. And then with the advent of subscription economy and the SaaS model, where suddenly people could buy year over year or month over month even, people found if they weren't getting value, they weren't renewing. So it really begs the question, what were the challenges that buyers were having and probably having all along that the subscription business model has really shed light on, and by doing so has actually now made it part of the vendor's problem. Because quite frankly, if people aren't adopting and they're not getting value, they're just not going to renew. So suddenly vendors have some real skin in the game, and they're really saying, wow, we need to do something. What does this look like? And what we've also found is that a lot of investors are saying, we need to make sure that our companies that we're investing in are retaining their revenues, retaining their customers and keeping year over year revenues. So what do they need to do to make sure that they're a good investment for us? So there's a lot of pressure here to make sure that people are getting value that never existed before. Just some things to consider that we found. This transition to the subscription economy and to the software business model, people, they make their initial buying decision based on hope. And it really is the idea that we've come in and we've seen a great demo from the sales team. We've like the features and functions. We like the videos. We see the functionality, and we have an image in our mind that this functionality could really work for us. And it looks great. And the challenge is that many of those demo environments that people see pre-sales, they're in a very clean, sanitized environment with perfect data and a nice script and people who really are experts in the system to show them what is possible. And it is possible. The problem becomes the experience. And that's what really is what the renewal decision is based on. And when customers see this great software and the possibilities, but then they get into their organization and they try to implement it there, and it's messy. There's dirty data. There's people who are not using the system well. There are people who don't use it at all, or who don't collaborate effectively, or there's cultural barriers, or whatever there may be. The problem becomes not the system itself, but what happens when you take it out of this pristine, clean demo environment and you put it into the complex messiness of a client organization. And the experience really starts to break down there. And when you look at this, you say, hey, who was the person that made this buying decision? They took a big leap of faith here. That executive sponsor, they're putting their reputation, they're putting time, they're putting money and resources on the line here. They've got a lot of skin in the game. And at some point, if they're not confident they're going to get value, it's better for them to cut and run. So they've got to go through and say, hey, we didn't get what we needed, or the system wasn't right, or whatever it may be. But really, they're taking a big chance here. And that comes back to then, it's the job of customer success to really make sure the experience and the outcomes exceed customer expectations and really thrive. Otherwise, as you know, customers aren't going to renew. So what is it that is getting in the way here? The real challenge is that you need to help customers deliver business results and business outcomes. Because while many software vendors say, hey, we've got these great features and functions, that's great, and that's what will enable the business outcomes. But what the customer really wants are those outcomes. And if they could do it without buying a feature or function, or without adding any new software or steps in their process, or new screens or widgets, they would. It's the business outcomes that they want. And really, customer success needs to say then, what is it that we need to do to help our customers achieve those? And what is it that they can't do on their own, or they won't do on their own? Where is it that our customers are struggling to adopt and get value? And then how do we help lead them through this process? How do we help them get the value that they need to renew? So let's take a look at that a little bit more. And what does that look like? What are the challenges here? Where do we need to go? And I like to start with the simple question is, when do IT projects fail? And here's a great question that you can even discuss within your own teams or even with your customers. Is it when the system is late? Maybe not. You can still get that business outcome, that long-term result that you need. Is it when the system doesn't work? Well, probably not, because if it doesn't work and you'd catch it in testing most likely. And you don't go live with systems that don't pass the basic functional test. So, if it doesn't work before that, it's not really a failure because you haven't gone the full distance of the organization. And then we get to the questions, do the projects fail before or after go live? And, I would say very few are complete failures before go live, because that's why you have testing. That's why you have those, quality checks and processes to make sure that if you can't make it work, it's not a failure because you haven't introduced the organization yet. But rather, we would say that the system really fails when it sits around unused and it's not delivering value. So it may have all the great bells and whistles, and even if it's delivered a little bit late, that's not really a failure. The failure is the lack of business results delivered to your organization. So let's use that as a jumping off point. Here's an easy visual that really, when I work this out with clients, I will whiteboard this on in the room with them and have a nice discussion interactively around success and failure and where they need to focus and where things are going to get wrong. So I highly recommend, as a tip, just have a structured conversation. Just map this out with your client and say, look, at the very beginning of a project, we're right here, and we have some expectation about business outcomes and benefits, or return on investment, whatever that may look like, that we will get in the future, whether that's a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. In a perfect world, wow, it's just a straight line. We just get right there. But the reality is, most organizations spend a lot of time right up front. They spend time getting requirements, designing processes, doing RFPs, verifying vendors. They spend a lot of time in meetings. They spend a lot of resources and money trying to make sure that they've purchased the system and that they've designed it and tested it and got it live and out the door. And when you look at that at the point of go live, all they've really done is typically maximize their sunk costs, or at least you hope they have. And they haven't gotten 1 ounce of value yet. So far they've made some big commitments here. And what we also see is that typically really focused on this go live activity and this go live milestone is some sort of what we call traditional change management effort. And I imagine for most of you, you're like, oh, we need change management. Well, what does that mean? Most people say, oh, we need some training, and they typically focus on how do we train people on how to use the system. And then we need some communications as well. How do we go through and try and sell people on what's in it for them and the benefits and all those other things? And that's typically the process, and it starts a little before go live and it ends a little after go live. And what we typically see time after time after time is this is what most people do and how they approach their implementations, and yet they consistently have low adoption, poor adoption, or even system failures. There's probably something wrong with this approach. And most people have not had the need or spent the time to actually dive deep into it and say, well, what is the problem? Where is this going wrong? And what do we need to look at? So with that as a milestone, when you look at this and you look at most projects, they really are focused on that go live area. And most IT systems and IT-led projects, it's like, all right, let's get it live. And then, as we call it, the go live and go home approach. The challenge becomes they just assume that you're going to hit those benefits. And yet the reality is there is a long effort that needs to happen to make sure that people actually do start to use it and that they collaborate effectively and that they're putting clean data in and that one department is using it well and as intended and as designed so that others in the enterprise can use that same system. And as you continue to move forward after the go live, there's a huge amount of basic adoption activity just to break even again. And typically when we ask organizations what they do, they aren't doing a whole lot there and they've got a huge amount of risk. And what we find is this is where projects tend to go off the rails quite a bit. And then ultimately, success happens sometime after you, way in the future, after you break even and you start to realize those business benefits. And in most projects, what we find is that those business benefits happen much later than expected and much lower than expected. An easy question to ask here is if you had to put together a project plan from the point of go live right up until the point that benefits are realized or you've hit that initial goal, what would you put on that plan? What are the steps? What are the activities? What are the resources that you would need? What needs to happen to make sure you drive that adoption, and how would you get there? Also, I call your attention to the question up top there. What does success look like 3, 5, and 10 years down the road? After the system's live, because people spend a lot of effort initially focusing on just get the system live, and then they either forget about the benefits and success. But if you want to have a client for 10 years, you need to understand what success looks like for 10 years. You need to understand what are the steps and actions that you need to take and the client needs to take to get them there and to ensure that continued ongoing success. Which really begs the question, when you look at the way most clients approach software adoption projects, or even most vendors, why are they spending so much time on the costs and the sunk costs and focusing all their effort on what happens before go live when all the value is created after? And if you want to have a 10-year client, if you want to have year after year renewal, why shouldn't you focus more of efforts there? And why shouldn't your clients? So that's just some quick thinking here to try and help shift the concepts a little bit. And if you're looking before go live for the most of your effort, and you're looking just even shortly after go live, like in the first 3 to 6 months during that critical onboarding time, but you're not looking 3, 5, and 10 years into the future, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. So we would highly recommend that you shift your focus to those long-term questions and then work backwards from there to say what are the steps and actions you need to put in place to get people up that cost recovery curve and into that success space. So that really, with that as a backdrop, what does this matter for, or why does this matter for customer success, and what should you be doing differently with your customers? I think the big thing to remember here is that what this really matters is getting renewals is about changing behavior of your customers and of their users. It's not about features and functions. Once the system is live and the features are out there, yes, there will be updates and yes, there will be changes and new functionality coming out. But what you're really talking about from a success perspective and adoption is changing the way people do their job on a day-to-day basis, changing their behavior of when they use the system versus when they go outside the system. Even something as simple as how would you change someone's behavior to get them to stop emailing documents and attachment and start emailing links and files and sharing things from Office 365 or Google Docs or things like that. It's really about changing how people structure their work and how they conduct their work on a day-to-day basis so that not only can they do their job well, but they enable everyone else in the enterprise and the organization to do their job as well. So if you start to think about this in terms of behavior, the next question logically becomes, and this is always another nice one to ask as well too, which is, how do you change someone else's behavior? Let's say that again. How do you change someone else's behavior? How do you get them to do their job differently? And the answer is, you don't. Only the individual can change their behavior. What you can change is your own behavior and the environment in which they are working and collaborating. So you need to look at those aspects and say, what can I personally do differently in how I approach my job that would help someone else change their behavior? Or what are the environmental factors? What are the areas where we can actually go through and change some behavior? And how do we do that in a structured, logical manner to get the business outcome we want? And when you start to ask your clients that, you start to get them thinking about these issues, shifting them to the long term, shifting them to focus on behavior, your clients will really know how to get your product even up and running, but they really won't know how to drive adoption to achieve measurable business value. They won't know how to do this, and as a customer success person or as a vendor, they're going to be turning to you because it's on the way to getting those business outcomes. And many of them have, many of your clients will rarely have the time and interest and capacity to figure it out for themselves. So if you can come in and help educate them and help provide them the tools and guidance they need to quickly adopt and then move up that curve and quickly get the business benefits by helping them to ask the questions they may not know to ask, by helping them to take the steps and approaches that they probably have never done before, they will greatly appreciate that, and then they will get the value so that they renew. One of our favorite quotes that we heard is, it's not the software that fails, it's the flashware. And it really is the people side. And I think many of you will find that the features and functions of your software are probably great. And many times people will say, hey, it's great, but for some reason we can't get our people to work it. And what they will then do is actually blame your technology when it's not the technology's fault. So really, part of the conversation, and you need to start to help shift the conversation with your customer, is getting them thinking about what are all the things they need to be doing to drive behavior change and help address the people factor, because that's where success is breaking down. That's where adoption is breaking down, and not look to a system change to get you there. So then the challenge becomes, how do you shift that conversation? How do you get your customers, especially if you're dealing with a technical audience or an IT-led project or even procurement, to get shifting those conversations? And how do you get them to really identify for themselves and for you, what are those long-term business goals that they need to hit in order to renew and expand their accounts? And then you need to help them say, how do you get them to focus on achieving those outcomes and not the go live? How do you get them to think ongoing adoption, ongoing business value? It's a big shift in conversation. And of course, just to make it a little bit more challenging, there's such a push for faster deployment and instant turn on the system and get it up and running in minutes, weeks, days, very, very fast, that in many ways, and people don't understand this actually can slow down adoption. When you accelerate the speed at which the technology can go live, there's less time and effort for change efforts prior to go live. You need to spend more time after go live. And typically we find organizations are even more unprepared to meet their user adoption challenges. So it's great they've got the system up and running live and fast, but then they can't get the value out of it. And they've moved so fast that they didn't bring the people along with them. What we have consistently found with many projects is the technology can move and evolve faster than the people in the organization can adapt it and adopt it. So then the questions say, well, how do we make sure that we have the infrastructure we need to have some ongoing adoption efforts? What are the skills that we need? What are the staffing that's going to happen? What are the methodologies, roles, and responsibilities? And what we found pretty consistently is that many projects, as soon as they're live, the team that was responsible for getting them live gets disbanded or focused on other projects. And it typically falls to technical support to answer any technical issues. But there's oftentimes not that ongoing adoption or business value focus that needs to be there. And even if there are one or two people who are measuring and looking at business focus from the client side, they typically don't have the resources they need to affect it and direct it as necessary. So one of the things we highly recommend is you start to shift with your customers the idea that they need to have an ongoing adoption program. The size and shape of that will change over time. You may need to do more efforts up front to get the new system live and to get the current staff to use it. But then when you look 3, 5, and 10 years down the road, you're going to have new people come into your organization. It's a very fluid environment. You're going to have new hires. You're going to have people retire. You're going to have people get promoted. People leave the organization for other opportunities. So there's a constant change here, and you need to make sure that you have an infrastructure by which you can actually get new people and people who shift roles up to speed and effectively adopting the software year after year after year. Similarly, if you're a software vendor, you're going to have a lot of new updates to your system and new releases. You need to make sure that not only are you helping people understand the new functionality and map it to their business processes, but that they're actually going through and making sure it's getting adopted. And as the new functionality comes out, how do you keep that pace going? One of the things we found, with agile development and regular release schedules and cadences and all the great stuff, many times one of the unintended consequences is you turn the learning curve for your users into a learning treadmill. And there's a constant effort of trying to figure out, what do I do? Where did I go? The screen has changed. The field has changed. The process changed. Who does that? So you've got to make sure that your customers are keeping pace with that. This requires a very different approach. So when we look at this, and we've had to help several organizations actually build out their adoption methodologies and their adoption programs and program plans, one of the first questions is, well, what do we need to include in it? And there are a lot of different organizational elements to look at. Some of them require more effort than others. Some will take a long-term, short-term view. But here's some of the big buckets. Really, I'll just quickly skim over these. But basically, helping customers understand what are those ongoing goals and outcomes you need to achieve. How does success change year after year? If your organization if your customer's organization has a different strategic plan and outlook for 5 years down the road, whether it's acquisitions, growth, market retention, or even making sure that they're not losing market share, whatever it may be, if they're updating their strategic plans and their tactics or new products, that will probably impact their success criteria for whatever systems and processes they're using and how they're going to measure it. You need to understand that. Communication and engagement. We won't have time to go into this now, but we do a lot of training around this, how the idea of what's in it for me and trying to sell people on the system, that is an ineffective message. You need to move beyond that to help people understand what is expected of them and how to be successful in their jobs and what are these successful behaviors they need to demonstrate using the system. If you're trying to sell someone or you hear just how great it's going to be, but you're missing the message here. Behaviors and performance management, that's actually saying, are people actually delivering what we need? Are they behaving the way and using the system in a way that not only they're doing their job well, but they're also enabling everyone else in the organization to do their job and be successful using the system? It's no longer okay to be a great individual performer if you do it in such a way and use the system in a way that people can't do their job. And some pretty simple examples of that are people not entering data on time, people entering wrong data and being sloppy, incomplete data, and doing other things that prevent other people from following their process or from automations to kick in or from having meaningful reporting. Training and learning, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Obviously, there's the work processes. Those need to be updated as systems go and change. Data analytics and use, making sure that you have both high quality data that's a strategic asset for your organization, but that people are using it to make effective decisions. That requires skill and knowledge and practice. And even capacity and culture. There's a lot of things in there from your organizational culture and subcultures and teams. Do people have the time and bandwidth to do what they need to do? Do they have the expertise? Do they have the skills? We've worked with many clients where they have the knowledge in their organization. They've got some brilliant people working for them, but they're so busy being assigned to other projects that they're not available to apply that. So it's of no use to them because it's truly not available. It's not capacity. And then obviously there is that whole IT functionality and updates that you need to look at. So there's a lot of elements here that you need to address in an adoption plan. But let's just talk about a couple of the more important ones. Coming back to the behavior piece, we'd like to make a distinction of what we call little t and big T training. Little t is really training as education. And that's probably what a lot of organizations are doing and a lot of organizations ask for. Training people on the product, how to navigate the screen, what's the point and click, what are the automations, what do I need to do? Getting people smart so they conceptually and cognitively understand where they need to go. And then big T training is conditioning. This is really that reinforcing behavior. So think of athletes and how they train. Think of animals, if you have pets, if you've seen people train a dog where they're repeating the commands and where they need to go so the dog understands what's expected. If you have young children, you've probably done a lot of this day after day, trying to condition them to behave appropriately in different social situations. It's not an educational piece, it's a behavioral piece. And so many organizations really focus just on the technical training and not on the behavioral condition that you need. And when you look at that, one of the big questions that you need to understand then is that that behavior needs to be reinforced day after day as people are doing their jobs on a daily basis. So the question becomes, well, who reinforces that behavior? How does that happen? What does that look like? And the short answer is, and most people don't understand this, the single biggest driver of user adoption in our experience is the immediate supervisor. It's that manager who creates the behavioral feedback for the users of the system. And many times these supervisors and managers, they don't know it's their job to actually drive adoption. They've never been asked to do it. They don't know how to do that. They don't know how to give feedback or what are the criteria by which they should. So if all of your training and communications are focused on the system and selling people on it, and you're not helping to prepare supervisors for their role in driving adoption of the system and driving changes in behavior, you're going to have a whole lot of problems here. So it's really important as you go through to improve software adoption is to make sure that your customers, one, understand that the critical role that supervisors play in reinforcing behavior and adoption, and two, then creating and enabling their ability to do so, giving them the skills to do it, giving them the specific guidance on what they should be doing and the steps they should be taking to reinforce behavior, and then making sure that cascades up, making sure that not just immediate supervisors, but their bosses and their bosses are understanding their role in driving adoption down throughout their organization and cascading through. I'd be interested to hear how many people on the call actually have clients that are doing this now or advise their clients to do this. I suspect it's a pretty low number. So with that as the backdrop, wanted to just sort of give you some ideas here that as you're thinking about driving software adoption, shift the conversations with your customers from technology to adoption behavior, from short-term go live to long-term success, from what is the training we need to give, and shift it over to how are we going to keep ongoing program adoption year after year? What is the structure of that team? Who's going to run it? What resources do they need? What steps and actions do they need to take to keep that going? Because really without that, you're not going to have the outcomes that you need. So just a couple of final thoughts as we're coming through. Some key concepts here. What we have found is customers care more about the so what than the what. And by that I mean they're more concerned about their business value and their business outcomes that they receive from the system. They care less about the features and functions themselves to get it there. They're important. They understand that without those, they can't get the business outcomes, but never lose sight of what they want is the business outcome. And as a software vendor, it's very easy to get excited about your software, but you need to make sure that you're focusing on what's important to the customer, which is the outcomes. And really, as a vendor, making sure that your customers are achieving that business outcome year after year, and that you're helping them to do so, and that you understand what that success looks like, and that you can give them proactive guidance to understand when they're going to run into trouble. We have a lot of discussions around when to have those renewal discussions and make sure you're on success, and we can cover that another time, but it's absolutely critical that you focus on business outcomes and not technical ones. Next one, your customers, we see this all the time, they will probably struggle to really understand adoption. What are the steps of adoption, how to get there? When I was studying information systems, everything was focused on getting systems live and managing the system, but there was no clear course or training or materials on how to drive adoption and what happens after it's live. And from what I've seen in other IT groups and other academic institutions, there's still not a lot of training and effective training on adoption and how to get there. And if your customers don't know how to do that and approach their projects in a way that will get them the results, they're going to struggle. And then ultimately, as we say, you don't focus on adoption for the sake of it, but you do it because it's on the critical path to getting that business outcomes and the renewals that you need. So really, that's where we see most organizations struggling the most, is getting the adoption, getting the value, and getting the renewals. And then just a final thought, if you're a customer success manager out there or working with your customers to make them successful, just some things to remember. as we said, the outcomes, but here's a critical one too. Your job is to provide guidance and advice, but you don't get to decide the specifics of the actions. That's for your customer to do. So you really need to figure out how can you be a trusted advisor and an influencer for them, and a resource that has the expertise that they need, that they probably don't have. And then how do you really lead them with confidence and authority so that they can move forward saying this is the right step? Because again, kind of like that slide with, faith, they're investing a lot of time and money in their personal reputation. And this is very stressful for them and their organization. They need to have confidence that as a vendor, that you're not just trying to push more software, but that you're really understanding their needs and their stress in their organization. So that's all I wanted to share with you guys for today. I thank you so much for joining. If you do have any questions, feel free to enter them in the question window. We did have a couple come in advance that I wanted to make sure I addressed. One was from an attendee who said, how can you work with your client to make sure that as they're driving adoption in one department, and the example they gave was marketing, that as other parts of the organization start to use it, such as sales, that adoption happens effectively, and that as the vendor, that you're not having to go and resell internally to a different client. There's some challenges there, but one of the things I would say is that if you help your client from the very beginning to understand the long-term business outcomes that they need and set up an adoption program that really identifies what are those adoption goals for the department and what are those business outcomes for the department, and then making sure that they have someone who internally who's responsible for ensuring that those happen and that you get the adoption and the expansion that they want. You may need to give them some tips and guidance on the different steps, but it really should be someone's in the client's organization. It's their responsibility to do that, and to also make sure that their supervisors and managers are driving the adoption that they need. Sales is always a tricky issue with that. Sales folks have a unique way of approaching adoption of technology. With an effective program and an effective sponsor driving that adoption and structuring the rules, you can get there. A quick example, we worked with an organization that they tried to drive adoption of their CRM and tried to get their sales folks to use it for ages. And eventually they had such a problem, they made the rule that if you don't have things in the system correctly by the end of the quarter date as expected, you'll be ineligible for your commission. So they had one sales guy who did not follow the rules, didn't enter the information. Instead, he emailed and bypassed and made a lot of other work for people and had things late. What they decided to do was they still shipped the product to the client to make sure the customer wasn't impacted. But for that sales rep, they actually didn't pay them their commission that quarter. And this was like a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 commission. It was a huge amount of money. So two things happened. One, that sales rep never made that mistake again, always had his stuff in complete and on time. And you know what? No one else did either. The story quickly spread by wildfire throughout the sales organization and the impact. And suddenly by having that example, they would go through and suddenly they got some great results and they really influenced that. Another client organization that went through, they were working, and one of the executives for ages, would occasionally look in the system but wasn't there regularly. And then someone showed him in the system one time all this great data as they were preparing for a customer meeting. He saw how wonderful it was. So he looked in the system to find the same data for another customer, and it wasn't there because a different user had not put in the information. It wasn't complete, it wasn't accurate. And as the executive, he couldn't do his job when meeting with that customer. So he immediately called that individual into his office and had a very tense discussion about why wasn't this in there? This is part of your job. I expect to see it. And suddenly that conversation got out as well too. And everyone was scrambling to make sure that they had everything accurate and complete because they didn't want to be called to the boss's office. So that comes back to the idea of making sure that as the manager, the supervisor, that you're driving adoption in the right way and providing the guidance and tools that need to do that. In this case, the big boss, the executive, waited a very long time to do that, but when he did, things happened very, very quickly, and it happened somewhat organically on its own. So that's just one quick example. All right. Well, I think that is about it that we have time for. If you have any other questions, please let us know. I did want to let you know as well that at Tritons, we do offer a variety of training classes, both for customer success managers, but also for software adoption for clients. And we have online content. We have in-person programs. We have blended learning programs. So we do hope you can check these out and join us. Some of the materials that you saw today were excerpts from one of our online training courses. So get a sense of some of the content. We really would love to figure out if there's anything we can do to help you. Please don't hesitate to give us a call. Thanks very much, and we hope you will join us for another webinar. Thank you.